"Sign here, Grant," Mason said, "and stop pretending you're necessary anymore." Brett smiled thinly, sliding the folder like a blade across marble. "Investors trust adults," he added, "not dreamers who still change tires." Cameras flashed, and I tasted copper behind a clenched smile. The Denver ballroom smelled like money trying to cover old dust. "You just fired your brother on live TV?" I whispered back. Mason shrugged, eyes shining with ambition that looked like hunger. "We upgraded the team," he said, patting Brett's polished shoulder. I breathed slowly and promised, "I won't destroy you, just outlive you." My voice sounded steadier than the earthquake happening quietly under ribs. The pitch deck behind them carried our logo, minus my name. I watched their mouths move while my years disappeared from every slide. They had taken my CAD drawings, my budgets, even my field photos. The downtown renovation project had been my idea after Dad's funeral. He'd wanted our father's drywall skills turned into something larger and lasting. We registered Lawson Urban Works together, 3 brothers building faith from invoices. Faith cracked tonight under chandeliers that reflected me in thinner pieces. A venture partner shook Mason's hand, ignoring the ghost hovering behind them. Reporters wrote my replacement live, their words quick and strangely polite. Rage felt heavy, but humiliation flowed like ice through arteries. Victor Hale arrived late, just as applause tried to wash everything clean. He was the contractor who believed in our lunch napkin drawings first. "What happened?" he asked, eyes flicking from me to the stage. I couldn't answer, so he read the silence and understood. "They locked you out," he said, voice dropping to practical sympathy. I nodded once, trying to keep my face from breaking. The publicist announced champagne, and strangers congratulated my brothers for decisive leadership. Brett accepted compliments like medals pinned on a uniform he hadn't earned. Mason winked at me, mouthing, "Business, not personal," like his favorite prayer. I felt the floor tilt, but I kept my spine stubbornly straight. Claire Monroe found me near the service doors, where truth breathes easier. We met in neighborhood council meetings, stuffing packets and picking chairs. She had vouched for our crew when permits started smelling political. "Tell me everything," she said, pressing a glass of water into hands. I told her the bare minimum, so I wouldn't collapse talking. "They used my work and canceled my access yesterday at midnight." Claire's mouth hardened, outrage hiding behind careful eyes trained by city rooms. "You could fight," she said, "or you could build again smarter." I stared at the ballroom and felt small, tired, and strangely clear. "I'll outlast them," I said, "and do it without applause chasing." I walked outside into Colorado night, slicing clean through. City noise. Streetlights painted the sidewalk gold where my shadow stretched forward. Sirens moved somewhere else, which felt appropriate for my heart. I scrolled our email, finding the board vote confirming my removal. Legal words stacked like bricks designed to hold one prisoner. I called Mom, but hung up before she answered sleepy. She had buried a husband, and I wouldn't bury her hope. Mason texted, "You'll thank me later," which made me almost laugh. Brett added, "Brand needed trimming," like I was a dead branch discarded. I turned the phone off and listened to traffic decide tomorrow. At home, I spread folders across the kitchen table like autopsy instruments. My sketches carried coffee rings, pencil ghosts, and calluses turned into lines. The drawings were mine, but the entity owned their final forms. Ownership has teeth when you're grieving, and sign papers too trusting. Dad's last words had been simple: lead with hands and heart. I had led with both, while they led with mirrors. The mirrors loved them back, especially when investors watched. I made tea, then forgot it, then reheated it twice impatiently. Sleep hovered, then vanished every time my chest tried steady breathing. "Outlive them," I whispered. "Outlive their scoreboard and rewrite the game." Morning light looked expensive against buildings we once promised to beautify. I walked downtown before crews filled streets with caution cones and deliverables. Our site banner flapped, fresh logos grinning like newfound honesty. A security guard recognized me, then pretended his memory had suddenly failed. I stared at the chain-link fence, imagining drywall dust and laughter. We had carried ladders like flags the first week after signing. Now the flags belonged to men who sold their own brother. A worker waved, recognized my boots, and looked quickly away uncomfortable. I didn't blame him. Loyalty breaks quietly under payroll schedules. I left before pity made me smaller than their decision. Victor called before noon, tone brisk as nails on plywood. "You still know the work," he said, skipping pity like a pro. "I have overflow projects needing hands that don't complain." Pride flared, then yielded to rent demanding practical answers today. "I'll be there," I said. writing the address on my palm. He paused, then added, "Bring the designs you still legally own." I looked at the stack labeled personal concepts nobody had funded yet. Small kitchen rebuild kits, ADA ramp components, and modular drywall anchors. They weren't glamorous, but they were mine by ink and witness. Ownership grows brighter when someone tries dimming your entire sun. I told Claire I'd help Victor nights while planning something honest. She brought coffee and a stubborn smile that could anchor ships. "We'll get your permits again," she said. "For something new. Bureaucracy used to scare me. Now it felt like exercise after grief." I drafted a name quietly, something that carried dignity without noise. "Northline Renovations," I wrote. "Grant Lawson, owner," and exhaled slowly. The letters didn't glow, but they didn't tremble either today. I emailed a landlord about a cheap corner storefront smelling like dust. The rent was offensive, but the windows faced sunrise every morning. Sometimes hope is geography, not philosophy, and sunlight negotiates better. That evening Mason called, expecting me to perform gratitude on demand. "Be smart, Grant," he said. "You weren't built for boardrooms anyway." I let the silence stretch until his confidence started checking mirrors. "You might be right," I said, "but I was built for storms." He laughed, then warned me about competing against family brands, theatrically. "I'm not competing," I said. "I'm continuing," which shut him briefly. He shifted, asked whether I'd sign a non-disparagement for goodwill. "I'll sign nothing that edits my name out again," I answered. He sighed, disappointed I wasn't already practicing his favorite submission. "Outlive me, then," he said, like a dare thrown across years. I stood on the balcony afterward, breathing Denver's thin evening air. Traffic stitched the city together, while my mind unstitched old loyalties. Dad's toolbox sat open, smelling of oil, oak, and prayers. I touched the tape measure he'd carried like a soldier's medal. "Measure twice," he'd say, "because regret is expensive and noisy." I measured the night and found it bright enough for beginnings. My brothers had chosen trophies, and I had chosen tools instead. Tools don't clap, they just ask to be held correctly. I tightened my resolve like a belt before an uphill climb. Tomorrow, I would start the long work of outliving their scoreboard. Rock bottom didn't hit all at once. It dripped slow, like a leak no one hears until the floor warps beneath you. My savings bled out in 2 months. Rent followed close behind, and the landlord's smile turned from polite to rehearsed concern. I sold my pickup for half its value and used the money to stretch time. Victor paid fair, but side work didn't fill a future. Nights were long, heavy with the sound of what-ifs echoing off drywall I couldn't afford to repair. I'd wake sweating, convinced I still heard Mason's voice rehearsing boardroom lies. "You'll thank me later," he had said. And I almost did, not for the betrayal, but for the silence it forced me to face. Silence teaches more than noise ever could. Still, there were days it felt like the silence was winning. I moved into a one-room apartment above an old print shop that smelled of ink and regret. The window stuck halfway open, the floor slanted toward the sink, and every sound carried like it wanted company. I lined the walls with sketches, not blueprints anymore, just rough ideas of what better might look like. If it's ugly, it's honest, I told myself, trying to make sense of life stripped down to essentials. The first week, I ate canned beans and fixed the landlord's cabinets for a rent discount. The second, I helped the old man downstairs unclog his printer and found $20 in his tip jar. It wasn't much, but it was earned, and that meant something. I learned to measure value not in zeros, but in effort. Some nights, I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker, pretending they were small promises that hadn't given up on me yet. Claire kept checking in, sometimes with food, sometimes just with words. "You don't have to win yet," she'd remind me. "You just have to stay in the ring." I'd laugh weakly, but I understood her meaning. Quitting wasn't an event. It was a decision made 100 quiet times before it showed. When I wasn't on site for Victor, I spent my hours sketching modular systems, small designs, portable tools for small contractors. Simple, affordable, American-made, built for people who work with their hands. My brothers wanted skyscrapers. I just wanted something that lasted longer than applause. But money was cruel and consistent, and every bill arrived dressed as urgency. I pawned my father's level once, promising to buy it back someday. The clerk said, "You'll need luck." I said, "No, I'll need patience." Weeks passed into months, and routine became survival. I'd wake before dawn, eat dry toast, bike to Victor's site, and stay until my muscles hummed. Victor liked that I didn't complain. "You work like someone who's trying to prove something," he said one afternoon. I smiled, But it wasn't a secret. I was proving something. Not to Mason, not to Brett, but to the boy who once believed family meant safety. Each evening, I'd return to my tiny workshop corner, tracing lines, tightening concepts, sanding wood, until the noise drowned the ache. I'd whisper ideas out loud like prayers, hoping one would answer back. It wasn't glamorous, but it was motion. And motion, however small, kept despair from rotting me hollow. Then came winter, and everything slowed. Work froze with the weather, Victor's contracts dried up, and I found myself counting change at a grocery counter. I bought ramen and instant coffee, the kind that leaves bitterness in your teeth. One night, the radiator died, and I slept wearing gloves. My breath fogged in the dark, and I wondered if this was how dreams froze to death, quietly, without protest. I thought about calling my brothers just to hear a familiar voice, but pride kept my hands still. They didn't deserve to hear the sound of me surviving. The next morning, I found a note slid under the door. From Claire. Still standing? It read. I smiled for the first time in weeks and wrote back. Barely, but I'm vertical. That night, I fixed the radiator myself using borrowed tools and stubbornness. As heat returned, so did something small. Belief, faint, but breathing. I remembered Dad once saying, when everything breaks, fix what's nearest first. So, I did. I fixed what I could touch, the chair leg, the loose window latch, my own resolve. Slowly, the world began to look less like punishment and more like training. I wasn't being buried, I was being planted. That thought hit hard, and I held on to it through every gray morning that followed. By February, Victor called again. Got a new project? He said. Not much money, but it's yours if you want it. I wanted it. The site was small, a neglected duplex on the east side, but it felt like oxygen. I worked alone, rebuilt walls, patched leaks, and rediscovered purpose in dust and hammer strikes. Neighbors stopped by, curious, kind, offering coffee and conversation. You're the guy rebuilding that place? One asked. Trying to, I said. He grinned. Trying's better than talking. Those words stayed with me. They reminded me that failure ends the day you move again. When spring returned, I biked past the skyline one morning and saw my brother's project towering above the city. Their names still gleamed on the building's base, but the glass was already cracked in places. From a distance, it looked perfect. Up close, it looked tired, rushed, hollow, expensive in all the wrong ways. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. They'd built something the world would forget before it aged, while I was still building something that might actually matter. I whispered, keep your trophies, and turned toward the east side, where real work waited for me. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, I wasn't scared of uncertainty. I was shaping it. The wind hit my face as I rode, cold but cleansing, and I realized something vital. I didn't need to beat them. I just needed to last longer. Not in noise, but in truth. And that's when I understood what Dad had meant all along. The best revenge isn't payback. It's persistence that doesn't need an audience. The first step didn't look like progress. It looked like sweat, dust, and rent payments barely made on time. Victor's duplex became my classroom, my confession booth, and my therapy all at once. I worked 6 days a week, patching cracked walls and learning patience from splintered wood. On Sundays, I'd sit in the unfinished living room with coffee in a chipped mug, sketching ideas that lived between failure and hope. Start small, Grant, I'd whisper to myself, but start right. I had nothing left to prove to anyone except the man in the mirror. My brothers had built a tower. I was building something closer to the ground, real, steady, honest. It wasn't glamorous, but every nail, every measurement, felt like reclaiming something they hadn't taken, my name. By April, I'd finished the duplex and made enough to pay rent through summer. The owner handed me an envelope thicker than expected. You're thorough, he said, smiling. That's rare these days. His words hit harder than the money. For years, I'd been the brother who did the work while others took the credit. Now, for the first time, I was both worker and witness. I took that envelope and rode straight to the city permit office, where Claire met me with 2 coffees and that same calm fire in her eyes. You're really doing this, she said, flipping through my rough business plan. Northline Renovations, huh? I shrugged. It's not a company yet, just a man with tools, she smiled. Every company starts as one stubborn man with tools. I rented a garage space behind a laundromat, the cheapest I could find. It smelled like detergent and determination. The owner, a retired welder named Louis, let me use the corner near his rusted sink. Don't flood it, he said, handing me a spare key. And don't quit. I nodded, pretending quitting wasn't still an everyday temptation. I stacked lumber along the wall, hung my father's level, and spread my blueprints like promises. Most nights, I worked until the laundromat lights went out, the hum of washing machines keeping me company. It wasn't a fancy shop, but it had something my brother's offices never did. Soul. I called it the workshop that couldn't lie. Everything inside was real, earned, and imperfect in the best way. Word of mouth began to travel through the East Side. People liked that I showed up when I said I would, that I listened, that I treated every job like it mattered. "You work like the old days," one client said, watching me sand a door frame. "Most folks just patch and go." I smiled, remembering Dad's voice. "If your name touches it, it better hold." So I made sure every project held, even when my body didn't want to. I fixed porches, repainted stairwells, rebuilt a fence that had survived 3 winters of neglect. Each finished job earned me a handshake and sometimes a pie from a grateful neighbor. It wasn't wealth, but it was respect. And respect, I learned, grows slow and strong like oak. One evening, as I packed my tools, Louis limped over from his office. "Got a guy asking for a kitchen remodel," he said. "Budget's tight, but it's honest work." I nodded, already grabbing my notepad. "Who's the client?" "Some lady named Marjorie. Runs the bakery on Maple," he said. "Wants cabinets that don't collapse when flour gets heavy." I laughed. I can promise that much. When I met Marjorie the next day, she eyed me skeptic. "You're younger than I expected," she said. "You sure you know what you're doing?" I grinned. "Not everything, but I know how to build something that lasts." She smiled then, and that job turned into my first real contract under the Northline name. Weeks stretched into rhythm. I'd wake at dawn, grab coffee from Marjorie's bakery, then dive into blueprints until sawdust clung to everything I owned. The kitchen came together piece by piece, maple cabinets, clean angles, smooth hinges that whispered shut instead of slamming. When she saw the finished work, Marjorie clasped her hands and said, "You build like a man, fixing something bigger than a house." I didn't answer. She wasn't wrong. I wasn't just fixing kitchens. I was rebuilding trust in people, in myself, in the idea that dignity could outlast betrayal. That night, I sat in the garage staring at the cabinet's leftover wood scraps. I carved one into a small plaque that read, "Measure twice, rebuild once." It hung above my workbench from that day forward. The calls came faster after that. Word spread, not through marketing, but through honest mouths that remembered good work. I didn't advertise. I didn't need to. People found me. Claire helped me file official papers for the business. "You're legit now," she said proudly, handing me the stamped certificate. "Feels weird," I admitted, staring at the document. "Feels real," she corrected. She was right. The kind of real you can't buy with borrowed money or fancy press releases. When I walked out of City Hall, I felt taller than the glass towers downtown. I didn't need my name on a skyline. It was already written in every beam I'd repaired, every screw I'd tightened, every hand I'd shaken. Still, the ghosts of comparison lingered. Sometimes, I'd catch news about Lawson Urban Works expanding into bigger cities. Photos of Mason and Brett posing in hard hats filled social feeds. They looked successful. Perfect smiles, expensive suits, quotes about vision and innovation. But their eyes looked tired in every photo. There was a weight there, the kind that money can't disguise. I stopped checking after a while, not because I didn't care, but because I finally did. About my own path more than theirs. I no longer needed to win. I just needed to continue. One night, Claire dropped by the shop with 2 beers. "You realize you've made it, right?" she asked, sitting on an overturned crate. "Not yet," I said, tightening a bolt. "You have steady work. People trust you, and you're still kind," she said. "That's making it." I smiled. "Maybe, but I'm not done building." She raised her bottle. "Then keep building, Grant. The world needs fewer moguls and more builders." I clinked my bottle against hers and said, "Then I'll build until the noise runs out." The sound echoed softly, fading into the hum of a city that still didn't know my name, but soon it would. By the time summer settled over Denver, Northline Renovations was alive in every way a man could measure. Not rich, not loud, but steady. The phone rang enough to keep my hands busy and my worries quiet. My days began with sawdust and coffee. My nights ended with silence I'd earned. I hired 2 part-timers, Jake, a young father from the duplex neighborhood, and Rick, a retired electrician who needed something to fill his mornings. "We're not big," I told them on day 1, "but we build right." They nodded, the kind of men who understood pride that comes without paycheck applause. Together, we fixed porches, framed basements, and turned empty rooms into homes again. Sweat became my second language. Each project carried a story, and I learned to listen to every nail like it was telling me where not to give up. Work didn't just grow, it stretched. One of Marjorie's bakery customers asked about her new kitchen, then hired me to remodel a cafe in the old district. That job brought more. I wasn't chasing contracts anymore. They were finding me. Claire kept my books straight, her handwriting neat where mine looked like exhaustion in ink. "You're turning into a real business owner," she teased. I laughed. "I just don't want to owe anyone." "That's exactly why it's working," she said, sliding me a spreadsheet. Numbers were never my strength, but even I could see the shift. The debts were shrinking. My savings were growing. Dignity, the kind my brothers could never counterfeit, was quietly compounding. One Friday afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up outside the garage. The driver stepped out with a clipboard and said, "Shipment for North Line, order of custom steel brackets." I frowned. "I didn't order that much." He shrugged. "Paid in full by Dalton Supply." My stomach twisted at the name. Ray Dalton, the same contractor who once backed my brother's company. There was a note taped to one of the boxes. "Still building better, I see. Keep it up, RD." I stood there for a long time, hands resting on the cool metal, realizing that word of my work had traveled far beyond this street. Not fame, respect, the quiet kind that walks instead of shouts. Days blurred into months, but the work never lost meaning. We took on a full renovation downtown, a historic brick building that locals swore was beyond saving. When I first walked through it, the walls leaned, the floors sighed, and the air smelled of rain trapped in wood. "You sure about this?" Jake asked, kicking a beam that groaned in response. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "It's tired, not dead." We stripped, sanded, reinforced, and painted until exhaustion became our anthem. By fall, the place stood proud again, old bones reborn under new hands. The owner cried when she saw it. "You didn't just fix it," she said. "You respected it." Those words followed me for weeks. I realized that's what Northline really did. Not fix, not build, but respect. The material, the craft, the people, the process, all of it. I caught glimpses of Mason and Brett's world now and then. News articles about corporate growth, photos at conferences, talk of franchising. Their company looked massive, glossy, hollow. Behind the marketing, lawsuits followed over. Unpaid contractors and shoddy materials. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt distant. They were sprinting. I was steady. They were seen. I was known. One day, a subcontractor mentioned they'd lost a huge city contract after failed inspections. "Lawson Urban Works is sinking," he said. I nodded, keeping my voice quiet. "Buildings stand or fall by their foundation," I said. Inside, I whispered to myself, and so do men. By winter, the shop had grown into something unrecognizable from the dusty corner I'd rented years ago. We bought better tools, added insulation, even hung a small Northline sign over the garage door. It wasn't sleek, white paint, blue letters, but it was honest. Claire stopped by with hot chocolate and a grin. "You're starting to look like a real company," she said. "You mean like a grown-up's version of chaos?" I teased. "No," she said, "like the kind of business your dad would brag about." I didn't respond right away, but I felt my throat tighten. "He'd tell me to stop working weekends," I said. "He'd tell you that you finally measured twice," she replied softly. I smiled because she was right, and because I finally believed I deserved the comparison. The following spring, we got our biggest project yet, restoring a fire-damaged school on the city's west side. It was risky, expensive, and bigger than anything we'd handled. "We can't do this alone," Jake warned. "Then we'll find people who believe we can," I said. We hired crews, subcontractors, and volunteers who'd gone to that same school as kids. The first day on site, one of them said, "Feels like home's getting another chance." I looked at the burned walls and nodded. "We all are." It took months, every hour and every ounce of grit I had left. But when we finished, the smell of paint and new beginnings filled the halls. When the city reopened it, they mentioned Northline's name in the ceremony. They called me a builder of second chances. I didn't think much of it until later that night when I realized that's exactly who I'd become. One quiet evening, I found myself sitting outside the workshop, watching dusk settle over the skyline. From here, I could see the faint outline of Lawson Tower, my brother's pride project. Its mirrored windows caught the last bit of sunlight and threw it back coldly. I remember the day I stood there, locked out, humiliated. Now, the memory didn't sting. It steadied me. "You didn't destroy them," I said out loud. The words strange but true. "You just outlived their version of success." The air felt lighter after that, as if the city itself agreed. The revenge I once wanted had turned into something better, respect for my own endurance. Claire joined me a few minutes later, handing me a beer. "You look like a man who's finally breathing," she said. I nodded. "Feels that way." She smiled, resting, her elbow on her knee. "You ever going to tell them what you've built?" I shook my head. "They'll see it when they're ready," I said. "And if they don't?" she asked. I stared at the skyline again, the reflection of the workshop's small sign glowing behind me. "Then I guess I'll keep building until the world sees it for them." The turning point arrived disguised as just another Monday. I was drinking burnt coffee, sorting receipts, when the email came. The subject line read, "City bid, North Line shortlisted." I blinked twice before opening it. The Denver Municipal Development Board was selecting 3 firms to oversee a new housing restoration initiative, and North Line Renovations was one of them. My heart stuttered, then steadied, as if the years of slow work had been quietly rehearsing for this exact moment. The bid wasn't massive, but it was official, government level, visible, respectable. My brother's company used to win these easily. Now, it was me, sitting in a modest workshop, staring at a contract they'd never see coming. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, "All right, Dad, let's see if your boy really measured twice." The next week felt like living inside an engine. Loud, constant, full of moving parts. Claire helped refine the proposal, her focus razor sharp. Jake handled logistics. Rick triple-checked supply lists, like a man guarding treasure. The final pitch meeting took place at City Hall, in the same wing where I'd once waited nervously for permits years earlier. I wore the same boots I'd worn that day, scuffed, scarred, and lucky. The panel asked about quality control, community hiring, sustainability. I didn't try to sound clever. I spoke like the worker I'd always been. "We don't build for applause," I said. "We build so the work outlives us." When the meeting ended, a woman on the board smiled slightly. "That's the most honest answer we've heard all week." I walked out into the cold sunlight, feeling taller than the marble steps beneath me. Days later, the call came. "Mr. Lawson," the official said, "North Line has been selected." My throat closed. I sat in silence, letting the words settle like dust in morning light. After hanging up, I called Claire first. She screamed so loud, I had to hold the phone away. "You did it," she shouted. "No," I said quietly. "We did it." Jake and Rick arrived 20 minutes later, out of breath and grinning like kids. We didn't throw a party. We just stood in the workshop, hands in pockets, staring at the letter pinned to the wall. For men who'd built their way out of silence, words weren't needed. That night, I closed up late and sat alone under the humming lights. Success didn't feel loud. It felt like peace knocking gently on the door I'd built myself. The first site meeting for the project was surreal. Rows of city officials, vendors, and reporters filled the lot. And among them, Mason. My chest tightened when I saw him, standing near a glossy SUV, wearing a smile too heavy to be real. "Grant," he said, approaching. "Been a while." His suit looked sharp, but his eyes didn't. "Didn't expect to see you here," he added, trying for lightness. "I could say the same," I replied, shaking his hand. "Last I heard, you were in Houston." He shrugged. "The market shifted. Hard year. Brett's working private now." His voice cracked just slightly. "I read about North Line," he said after a pause. "Looks like you finally made it." I smiled faintly. Not finally, just honestly. His gaze dropped, and for a brief second, he looked like the little brother who'd followed me into Dad's workshop, hungry to belong. Then he forced a grin and stepped back. "Well, congratulations," he said. "You deserve it." He meant it, or maybe he didn't. But I didn't need to know anymore. That night, I walked the project site long after everyone left. The streetlights cast gold across the steel beams, making the skeleton of future homes glow like quiet promise. For the first time, I wasn't chasing redemption. I was standing in it. My success didn't need to roar. It hummed like the machine still cooling behind me. Claire joined me later with 2 cups of gas station coffee. "So," she said, "how does it feel to be on the other side?" I thought about her question. "It feels earned," I said finally, "and lighter than I expected." She smiled. "That's because revenge weighs more than peace." I nodded. "Then I guess I've been dropping weight for years." Over the next months, North Line's name began appearing in headlines. Local builder revives Denver's historic neighborhoods. North Line's founder redefines American craftsmanship. Reporters came by, asking for interviews, cameras flashing in spaces that once smelled of rust and fear. "You're becoming famous," Jake joked one day. "Nah," I said, tightening a hinge. "I'm just visible now." The difference mattered to me. Fame is when people know your name. Respect is when they know your work. I chose the latter every time. Yet, With visibility came whispers. Someone sent me a link one evening, a blog post detailing Lawson Urban Works' financial collapse, lawsuits, debt, unpaid subcontractor. My brother's empire had crumbled under its own weight. The article ended with one line that caught me off guard. Sources confirm that founder Grant Lawson was forced out early in the company's history, perhaps the only one who built something that lasted. I closed my laptop and stared at the dark screen for a long time. I didn't feel victory. I felt something closer to mourning. They had chosen shortcuts. I had chosen survival. Their tower stood empty now, glass reflecting nothing but sky. I thought about Mason's handshake, about Brett's silence. Success wasn't revenge anymore. It was a mirror showing me what could have been. Claire found me that evening, sitting outside the shop again. "You saw the news," she said softly. I nodded. "You're not happy about it." "No," I said. "I just wish they'd learned without falling." She rested her hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes falling is the only teacher left." I exhaled, watching a plane cross the night sky. "Then maybe it was the only class I ever passed," I said. A week later, Mason came to the shop. No cameras, no entourage, just a man in wrinkled clothes, holding the same look of exhaustion I used to wear. "I needed to see it," he said quietly, stepping inside. He walked the floor slowly, tracing his hand along the workbenches, the smell of sawdust thick in the air. "You did all this," he murmured. "You made something that doesn't need an apology." I didn't answer. Words weren't needed between us anymore. He turned to me finally. "I messed up," he said. "I broke everything that mattered." I nodded. "Then start rebuilding," I said. "That's what I did." He smiled weakly. "You think that's still possible?" "If it wasn't," I said, "I'd still be on the floor where you left me." When he left, I stood at the doorway, watching him walk down the block, shoulders slumped, but steps honest. I didn't know if I'd ever trust him again, but I realized trust wasn't the goal anymore. Peace was. I turned back to the shop, to my people, to my tools. Everything that mattered was still standing, and that was enough. The reunion came wrapped in an invitation I didn't expect. Celebration of family and legacy. Lawson Urban Works Founders Dinner. The irony nearly made me laugh. I read it twice, then set it on my desk beside a cup of cold coffee. Mason's signature sat at the bottom, neat but nervous. The dinner was being held at the very hotel where they'd cut me out years ago, the marble floors that once echoed my humiliation. I stared at the date, Saturday, and thought about tossing the invitation away. But something in me hesitated. Not revenge, not pride, just curiosity. I wanted to see what was left of the men who once thought I was beneath them. Claire caught me staring at the card that night. "You're going," she said. "You already decided. You just don't know why yet." She was right. I wasn't going to settle a score. I was going to measure how much peace weighed compared to bitterness. Saturday arrived dressed in rain and memory. The drive downtown felt like traveling backward through time. Denver's skyline shimmered with the same expensive indifference, but I wasn't the same man walking into it. My boots clicked against polished floors that once swallowed me whole. The ballroom looked smaller now, maybe because I wasn't trying to fit inside someone else's version of success anymore. Mason stood near the stage, talking to a few old investors who looked too polite to care. Brett hovered by the bar, a drink sweating in his hand, his once perfect posture bent by exhaustion. When Mason saw me, his eyes widened slightly, then softened. "You came," he said. "You invited me?" I replied. Seemed rude not to. He nodded, fumbling for words. "You look good, Grant." I smiled faintly. "I work for a living. That'll do it." The room quieted when I walked in further. A few people recognized my face from recent newspaper features. Whispers started, the kind that used to sting, but now only reminded me how far I'd come. Brett approached, his tie loose, eyes glassy. "Didn't think you'd show," he said, his voice carrying the familiar edge of someone who used to feel taller. "Didn't think you'd invite me?" I replied. He gave a sad laugh. "Mason's idea?" He said maybe it was time. "For what?" I asked. "To face what we broke," he said quietly. There it was. No denial, no bravado, just honesty cracked wide open. I nodded once. "Then let's start with the truth," I said. "You didn't break me. You built me." His jaw tightened, his eyes wet with something between regret and disbelief. "I guess we owe you more than an apology, he said. "You owe yourself one," I replied. Dinner began, but I barely touched the food. The speeches felt hollow, the kind of nostalgia people rehearse when they don't want to confront the full truth. Mason spoke about lessons learned and family endurance, words that tried too hard to sound noble. I watched him carefully, the man who once stole my name to build a brand. His voice trembled near the end. "None of it means much," he said, glancing at me. "If the foundation was built on pride." The room went silent. For a second, I saw the boy I'd grown up with, not the businessman, not the trader, just my brother, trying to say sorry without falling apart. When applause came, It was polite, but softer than usual, like the crowd sensed something more sacred than success had just been spoken. Afterward, Mason found me near the exit. "I've wanted to tell you," he began. "You already did," I interrupted. "Up there." He exhaled, relieved, but heavy. "I don't know if I can fix things, Grant. I don't even know where to start." I studied him, really looked at him. The lines carved deep by ambition, gone wrong. "Start by meaning it," I said. He nodded. "You did better than us," he admitted. "You built something real." "No," I said quietly. "I built something honest. That's different." He smiled weakly. "Maybe honesty's what we were missing all along." His voice cracked and he looked away. "You think Dad would forgive us?" he asked. "He already did," I said. "He just waited for us to catch up." Brett approached then, slower, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed me one and lifted his slightly. "To rebuilding," he said. I hesitated, then clinked my glass against his. "To learning," I corrected. He smiled faintly. "You were always better at definitions." We drank quietly, the silence heavy but not cruel anymore. When he left, I stood by the window, watching rain streak the city lights. It looked like the skyline was crying, not from sadness, but from release. The ghosts of that room, the betrayal, the humiliation, the vows, all seemed to dissolve with every drop hitting the glass. I didn't feel triumph. I felt distant. The good kind. The kind that tells you you're finally free from caring how the story ends. As I walked out into the rain, Mason called after me. "Grant," he said, voice rough with something real. I turned. "I hope one day you'll forgive us." I met his eyes, steady. "I already did," I said, just not out loud. He nodded, then smiled sadly. "Maybe that's enough." I walked into the wet night, the city lights shimmering across puddles like reflections of every version of me I'd ever been. The humiliated brother, the broken worker, the builder, the man who no longer needed to win. Somewhere between all of them, peace had finally built a home. When I got back to the workshop, it was past midnight. I hung my jacket, turned on the small lamp by the bench, and traced my finger over the plaque I'd carved years ago. Measured twice, rebuild once. The wood had aged, darkened, and cracked slightly, but it still held, just like me. The rain tapped against the roof, soft and rhythmic, and I realized this was what victory truly sounded like. Quiet, patient, certain. The morning after the dinner, I woke before sunrise, the rain still whispering against the windows. I made coffee, sat at my workbench, and tried to put words to what I felt. It wasn't victory, not really. It was something quieter, something heavier. Forgiveness, maybe, or the beginning of it. My brothers' faces haunted me in a different way now, not as villains, but as men who had finally seen what they'd done. Their apologies lingered in the air like unfinished prayers. I'd spent years dreaming of this moment, rehearsing what I'd say if they ever broke down. But when it happened, I hadn't needed words at all. The silence had done all the speaking. The truth was, I didn't want them destroyed. I wanted them redeemed. Because revenge ends when destruction begins, and I'd already seen enough of both. The next few days, Mason called twice and texted once. Simple messages. No business talk, no excuses. "Hope the new project's going well. Mom wants to see you soon. Thank you for showing up." I didn't reply to all of them, but I read each one more than once. I think part of me was waiting to see if they'd fade again once guilt wore off. But they didn't. Mason stopped by the workshop that Friday afternoon with no warning, hands tucked in his pockets, eyes tired but clear. "Didn't think you'd still be here," he said. "Where else would I go?" I answered. He smiled faintly. "You always knew where you belonged?" I motioned toward the workbench. "Took me long enough." He looked around the shop, running a hand along one of the new cabinets. "You built a life here," he said quietly. "You built yours too," I replied. "You just built it on sand." He laughed, not defensively, but like a man who'd finally accepted the weight of truth. "You're right," he said. "And when it collapsed, I realized I didn't miss the buildings. I missed the foundation." He looked at me. I missed us. I didn't know what to say to that. For years, I'd imagined hearing those words and feeling triumphant. Instead, I just felt still. "You can't rebuild what you burned," I said finally, "but you can build again beside it." He nodded. "If you'll let me." I studied him, really studied him. His hands were rougher now, his confidence less polished. "You don't need my permission to start over," I said. "You just need your own courage." He exhaled slowly, like a man who'd been holding his breath for years. "Guess I'm finally learning how to breathe again," he said. A week later, Brett showed up too, carrying a box of old papers and blueprints. "These belong to you," he said, setting it down. "Old drafts, prototypes, even your first sketches. I found them in storage." I ran my fingers over the yellowed pages, tracing the pencil lines I'd drawn in another lifetime. "You kept these?" I asked quietly. "Couldn't throw them away," he said. "Didn't feel right?" He hesitated before speaking again. "When you left, I told myself you couldn't have done it without us. But I was wrong. We couldn't have done any of it without you." His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't know whether to thank him or forgive him, so I just nodded. You held on to my past, I said softly. Maybe that means you still believed in it. He looked down, ashamed, but grateful. I always believed in you, Grant, he said. I just didn't know how to say it back then. We stood in silence for a long time. The workshop smelled of oil, sawdust, and redemption. He glanced at one of the younger workers fixing a cabinet near the door. You've got a team now, Brett said. People who actually trust you. I smiled. Trust isn't given. It's earned, nail by nail. He nodded, the weight of those words sinking in. I'm learning that, he said. For the first time in my life, I'm learning to work without an audience. I looked at him and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. It wasn't pretty or polished, but it was real. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Guilt, when it's honest, doesn't beg for forgiveness. It builds it, slowly, brick by brick. When they both left that evening, I stood alone in the doorway, the sunset spilling, across the street in gold and amber streaks. For the first time since Dad died, I didn't feel like the broken son trying to live up to a legacy. I felt like the man who'd finally defined his own. I walked back inside, turned on the old radio, and let the music fill the quiet. My brother's voices still echoed in the back of my mind, but now they sounded human again, not enemies. Just men learning late what I'd learned early, that success without soul is failure dressed in a suit. Later that night, I called Mom. Her voice wavered when she answered. Grant, she said, like she couldn't believe it was me. Yeah, Mom, I said softly. Just wanted to say I'm okay. I heard her exhale, relief mixed with years of worry. Your brothers told me, she said. I think they finally understand. I smiled into the phone. Maybe we all do. There was a long pause before she spoke again. Your father would be proud, honey, she whispered. I swallowed hard. I think he already knows. When I hung up, I stared at the dark window, my reflection looking back, older, steadier, at peace. I realized that revenge had never been the end of the road. It was just the sign that pointed me toward redemption. My brothers had their reckoning. I had my rest. And somewhere between those two things, the story finally found its balance. The boy who'd once been cut out of his own dream had become the man who rebuilt it with his own hands, not to prove a point, but to live one. The sun rose slow that morning, spilling gold across the workshop like forgiveness made visible. I sat alone with a mug of black coffee, the air heavy with the smell of sawdust and calm. The machines were quiet, tools neatly hung, blueprints stacked like a history I'd finally stopped running from. I thought about Mason and Brett, about the way they'd looked that last night. Not proud or broken, just human again. For years I'd pictured this ending differently. I thought revenge would taste sweet, that success would silence everything they'd taken from me. But the truth was simpler, softer. I didn't outsmart them. I didn't destroy them. I just outlasted the noise. I'd built something that didn't need defending. And that somehow felt more powerful than victory. I drove to Mom's house that afternoon, the one we grew up in, smaller than I remembered, but still standing like it refused to give up on us. The porch steps creaked the same way they always had, each one groaning like memory itself. Mom opened the door before I knocked, her smile trembling with pride. You came, she said. You didn't think I'd stay away forever, did you? I replied, trying to sound casual. The smell of her cooking wrapped around me like home trying to apologize. Mason and Brett were already there, setting the table awkwardly, careful not to break the fragile truce. When Mason saw me, he smiled cautiously. We kept your seat, he said. Didn't think I still had one, I answered. You always did, Mom said firmly, her voice reminding us who taught us strength in the first place. Dinner was quiet at first, full of small talk and long glances. Mason asked about the new project, Brett about the crew. I answered simply, without bragging, without bitterness. You built something real, Grant, Mason said finally. Something we never could. I looked at him and shook my head. You could have. You just built for different reasons. He nodded slowly. We chased recognition. You chased purpose. I chased peace, I corrected. Recognition fades. Peace doesn't. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't hostile. It was understanding. Brett leaned forward. You ever think about doing something together again? He asked cautiously. I paused, watching both of them, then smiled faintly. Maybe someday, but not to prove anything, only if it feels right. They both nodded, like men who'd finally learned the language of humility. After dinner, Mom handed me a small box she'd kept hidden for years. Inside was Dad's old compass, its brass tarnished, but its needle still true. He said this belonged to the one who found his own direction, she said softly. My throat tightened as I turned it in my palm. The needle quivered, then pointed north, steady, unwavering. Guess it's official, I said, trying to smile. Guess it always was, she replied. Mason looked at the compass too, his eyes glassy. He'd be proud, you know, he said. of all of us. Maybe, I said quietly, but I think he'd be proudest that we're finally sitting at the same table. Brett laughed through his tears. That's a first. And for the first time in forever, we all laughed together, not as enemies pretending to be family, but as brothers who'd finally come home. That night, I sat outside on the porch long after everyone had gone to bed. The stars were clear, the kind of quiet only small towns know. I turned the compass in my hand again, thinking about the years it took to get here. Every betrayal, every night alone, every small job that felt too small to matter. They all pointed here, to this stillness, to this peace. I realized something then. Success isn't something you build. It's something you grow into slowly, when you stop needing to be seen. My brothers had learned it the hard way. I had learned it the only way, by losing everything and starting over with nothing but stubbornness. And maybe that was always the lesson Dad was trying to teach us, that sometimes the only way to find your path is to let everything else collapse around you first. A few weeks later, I got a call from the city council. They wanted Northline to consult on a new apprenticeship program for local youth. "You're proof that second chances build better workers," the councilwoman said. I smiled, humbled. "Second chances build better people," I corrected. When I hung up, I looked around the workshop. The same walls that had once heard my doubt, now echoing with laughter and purpose. Jake was teaching a new kid how to use the drill press, and Claire was in the office yelling at suppliers with her usual charm. It wasn't a company anymore. It was a family, one I'd built from scratch, not out of blood, but out of trust. And maybe that's what real family is. Not who you're born with, but who chooses to stay when everything else falls apart. That night, Mason called again. "We're starting small," he said. "A community project. Nothing big, just honest work." I smiled into the phone. "That's the best kind." There was a pause. "You think you'd ever come see it?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. "I'm learning to look forward again." He laughed softly. "You already sound like Dad." "Good," I said. "That means I'm finally doing it right." When we hung up, I didn't feel the ache I used to. Just gratitude. For pain, for time, for growth, for all of it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even proud. I was just free. I turned off the shop lights and stepped outside. The cool night brushing against my face like forgiveness. The city buzzed in the distance, alive and uncaring, but that didn't matter anymore. I'd carved my own peace into its noise, and it had learned to leave me alone. I thought of my brothers, of the man I used to be, and of the boy who once stood outside a locked door promising to rise again. That boy had kept his word. He hadn't destroyed anyone. He'd simply built a life too honest to be compared. If this story found you, let it remind you, revenge fades, but dignity endures. And tell me, if you were me, would you open the door again to the brothers who broke you, or leave it closed and let peace be your final answer?